we are. So we are recording, and as people come in, I guess as they trickle in, we'll get started. Oh, I forgot music today. I'm so busy with everything else. So I'll throw on some tunes here. Actually, you know what? I thought better of it. I'll bring up something else. Has anyone seen? It's actually embarrassing to even say the title of the show, but I've been watching Schitt's Creek. If anybody has been watching that on Netflix, I just finished the series. Very good stuff. Personally, my opinion. Maddie, I see your head shaking. Yes. Did you finish it? Did you watch the whole thing?
Yes. Yep. I've watched the whole thing. So good.
Yeah. The character development. The whole thing was just really wonderful.
It's so heartwarming.
All right, anyway, it's on Netflix. If anybody's interested. And then the most important advice, at least for me, I'm curious about you, Maddie, but for me, I had to like slug through season 1. Like once I got through the first season, I felt I liked the first season, but then the rest really picks up, and I think it gets better and better. So just my personal opinion. If you're interested in such things, that has nothing to do with our class, and but I think since we have a critical group here, we should get going. So welcome back, everyone. It is week 5. We've done a month of Jewish learning, and that is worthy of celebration. So you can give yourself a pat on the back or whatever you'd like to do. So I really wanted to leave a moment or two just to ask any question in general. Anything that's been on your mind. A lot of you are going on this exploration of Judaism, and so if there's anything that you that has come up, I see actually, Margie, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask your question or answer your question from the chat. Not many people, as people came on, they may have missed it, and I think that's the case with Zoom, that you wouldn't see it if it was chatted beforehand. But the question is about sinning in Judaism, like related to last week, right? With this idea, are there sins that are more, important, or are there rules that are more important than others? And I guess consequently, could breaking those rules be more important than others? So this again depends on what you believe the Bible to be and what you believe the Torah to be. But the rabbis of the Talmud say there are 613 commandments, and they all apply, and that means from that perspective, they're equally important, right? God has them for a reason, and there's no ranking system. Nowhere in the Torah does it say, follow this one the most. That being said, the rabbis of the Talmud are very quick to hold up some laws over other ones. One of the most famous, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, is Rabbi Akiva actually goes ahead and says, Ze klal gadol b'Torah. This is a big, right? A gadol means big. This is a big commandment in the Torah. And so arguably you could say breaking that, right? Not treating your neighbor as yourself you might acquire more of a sin. Interestingly, you put in here other than the Big 10, and it's interesting, they are referred to as 10 laws that come down from Sinai, but there's never a statement like these are the only or the big ones you should follow. That is also later interpretation. Now, I would agree, right? Like murder, right, is a pretty big one. Like, don't do that. And that is certainly one that's high up there. But you could argue, depending, right? One of the Big 10 is keeping Shabbat. I can think of a bunch of laws that didn't make the list that probably should have been if we were ranking them as the top 10. But the question then becomes, is it the top 10 for what, right? Is it the top 10 for like living a moral life? Is it the top 10 for identifying as Jewish? Is it the top 10, right? You could think of a lot of different ways you could go. First, because certainly, at least I would argue, observing the Sabbath, right, there are plenty of moral and good people who don't observe the Sabbath, right? So, and yet it's one of the Big 10. So that's definitely it's a great question. Any other things you've been wondering about in your? Yes, go ahead, Dave.
So I think it was at the end of Sukkot, or it was end of one of the, certainly wasn't the Passover, where you can't drink wine and you can't eat bread. And I got the sense of the wine thing, to be alert and be present in your, maybe it was Yom Kippur. I'm trying to figure out which one it was. It was very specific, and I was curious about why you couldn't eat bread. It certainly wasn't Passover, so it was one of the others. And it was at the end, like the last day of the holiday or something like that. That ring a bell?
I think you stumped the rabbi.
No, I'm just not sure which it was in the book. I wasn't sure which, at the moment, which holiday it was. It might have been Yom Kippur.
So you're saying it's a holiday that's not Passover,
I think
where you're not allowed to eat bread?
I think it was Sukkot, because it's something like the 8th day to 9th day. Some we celebrate, 7 days. You could celebrate, other sects celebrate 8 days, but on that 8th day, or maybe you can't have wine the day before. Can't have wine or bread the day before. And I kind of sensed the wine was just to keep in the present while you're meditating, but the bread part I didn't understand.
I will have to look this up. If you can find it in the reading, we should definitely take a look at it.
Yeah, I was thumbing through now, but I'll get it and I'll get it back to you.
All right, thank you. It's an important question. I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I'm not thinking of it. It's great. Anything else? So I'm reminded. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll leave another moment. I'm always eager to keep going. I have to remind myself. It's like a teaching skill of mine. Like, let people process. And that we're all not external processors. All right, now we'll move on. Okay. So one of my favorite things, whenever you can start off class with a joke that's meaningful, got to take advantage of that. And I think that's for anyone, but especially as a father and as a rabbi. And this is like a dad joke and a rabbi joke all in one. So a child is walking with his father to synagogue, and so the child says, "Dad, why do we go to synagogue every week?" And father kind of shrugs him off. They like keep walking, and again they're getting closer. "Dad, like, why do we go to synagogue?" No answer. So finally they're sitting in synagogue. They're sitting in the back row, and the kid is like really insistent, right? Dad, why do we go to synagogue? What is it about this place? And the father whispers. He says, "You see Mr. Goldberg sitting there in the front row?" He says, "Yeah, I see Mr. Goldberg." He says, "Mr. Goldberg comes to talk to God." He says, "Oh, I come to talk to Goldberg." And that is in essence, what we're going to be discussing today in a nutshell, right? So why do you go to synagogue? Why do you pray? Right? Some people go and some people pray to God. Right? Other people find deep meaning in community, right? With being there for one another. And prayer for thousands of years has been the glue that has held Jewish people together, I would argue, more than anything else. So that is what we're going to talk about tonight. And we will open up this discussion. Please feel free at any time to stop me, ask questions as we go along. But what I've done is prepared. Usually this would have been like on the board, but I've got a vocabulary list for you. Okay, let me make sure I'm not forgetting any. Okay. So the first word I'm going to introduce to you on the topic of prayer is the word tefillah. So there it is in Hebrew, transliteration, and English. Tefillah means prayer. Hebrew is a 3-letter root system. Okay, I'll leave that up in case you're copying it down. And the root of the word tefillah is palal. Okay, pei lamed lamed. don't worry about, if you don't know what I mean, don't worry about it. It's okay. But in the root, literally inside each Hebrew word is a root. And the root palal means, my handy dandy dictionary here, biblically, it means intervene, interpose, arbitrate, judge, or pray. It's a lot of ways to define that word. Okay, so to pray is to intercede, is to judge, to arbitrate, right? All of these words are words that are helping us hopefully understand a little bit about what the Jewish conception of prayer is. Okay, so that's your first Hebrew word. The next Hebrew word you need to know is sidur. Okay, and here it is. I wrote it out for you. A sidur, and here it is in transliteration, but it's also effectively an English word. It means your prayer book. And again, here the Jewish root, the Hebrew root comes into play. The root of sidur is one you might recognize, seder. Seder is what you sit down for at a Passover seder, or seder, as people say. So what is the point of that word? Why is that there? A seder is an order. The dinner is an order of things that you do to tell the story of this Exodus from Egypt. A sidur, a prayer book, is what you do. It's an order of prayers. It orders the prayers for you through a service. Okay, and that's what a sidur is. So you might hear in services, please turn to page whatever, 900 in your sidur, right? Which means in your prayer book. The plural is sidurim, in case you ever encounter someone saying like that there's a bunch of them. And that's what a sidur is. Okay. Next vocabulary word. Welcome, Sarah. We're just we're going through some Hebrew vocabulary for prayer services. So the two words that you missed, we'll catch you up really quick. Tefillah is prayer, okay, and a sidur is a prayer book. You're now caught up and an expert in prayer. All right. Who leads this stuff? Who leads our prayers? I've got three answers for you. First one, I'll try and do it this way, is the chazan. The chazan is the cantor. I like to give my cantorial colleagues the respect before getting to us rabbis. I'm just kidding. So you have the cantor, the rabbi, Rav or Rabbi, right? Rabbi, okay? And not to undercut my own business here, okay? But actually, you don't need a rabbi or a cantor to lead you in service. What you need is someone who is above the age of 13, because that is the age of majority in Judaism. It's the age of bar and bat mitzvah, and someone who knows the prayers. If you've got that, you've got yourself a prayer leader. And that person is called a shaliach. Sorry, this is just a mess. I'll do this again. Shaliach or shlichat tzibur, which literally means an emissary of the community. It is someone who is sent up to the bima, okay, and we'll talk about that in a moment, to lead prayers. If anybody knows anyone with the last name Schatz, okay, that is actually it is likely that somewhere in their family, there was someone whose job it was at the synagogue to be the shaliach tzibur, that they would be the one who was leading prayers. And the way that works is that in Hebrew, there's often opportunity for acronyms. So the shin makes the sh sound, okay, and that's for shaliach or shlicha. And then this is a final tzadi, okay, which makes the ts sound for tzibor. So you have the two first letters, and together it's Schatz. And so if you know someone named Schatz, it's likely somewhere in their lineage there was someone who was leading prayers at a synagogue. It's also a really profound statement, right, that what the prayer leader is doing. The prayer leader is not called the leader or the prayer right? They're called the emissary of the community. They are sent forth by everyone to sing the prayers and lead the prayers. Okay. So any of those combinations of people lead a Jewish service, right? You have the rabbi, as we are often criticized for doing, right? You have the rabbi calling page numbers. It's a tough job. Someone's got to do it. You have cantors who bring beautiful music to it. I envy those musical rabbis who can do it both. And then you have generally these days, right? It would be bar and bat mitzvah students who are up there leading services, but depending on the community, it can be anyone. There are things, we've got a uniform. Jews have a uniform that they wear when they pray. Okay, there's a couple of things here. You have a talit, and for this, actually, I'll share my screen and show you some photos that I looked up online. Of course, you type in talit today, it's a whole industry, so you get a lot of advertisements. But here we are. And okay, so here are a wide array of talitot. It's the plural of, or sometimes talesim. Okay, the talit, the big part, I'll just pick any one to show you. But the important part, well, it's all important, but the defining attribute of a talit are the fringes on the bottom. These are called tzitzit. And these are, it's placed on the corners of the talit. There are also fringed elements here along this, and this gets wrapped around you. I mean, it's modeled in different ways. Some people at certain parts of the service will place it over their head, or you can have it around the shoulders. And generally, it has stripes, okay? And this is a defining measure of a Jewish adult. You will see bar and bat mitzvah students getting a talit at their bar and bat mitzvah. It's generally worn in the morning, or sometimes to identify the prayer leader. So on a Shabbat evening, I will wear a talit, even though it's really a morning ritual, M-O-R-N-I-N-G, you know, like the time of day. But I will wear it at night to show, like, hey, I'm the guy leading services tonight, right? That's another way that you can do it. Okay. Great question from Bonnie and David. Do you need a minion? Once again, not the yellow people. I mean, that also works. And I actually had an amazing, there's a picture that made its way around that during quarantine times, like, how can you pray with a minion? And so there was someone with a little, you know, the yellow minion, right, doll in his hand praying. Minyan is the Hebrew word for quorum, and it is a requirement for communal prayer to have 10, and now it depends on your community, 10 Jewish adults, 10 Jewish men. Okay, it all depends on where what community you're praying in the Reform movement, Conservative movement, Reconstructionist movement. It's 10 Jewish adults, regardless of gender. Okay. I threw a lot at you. Questions so far?
I have a question.
Please.
So
Go ahead,
you mentioned that the emissary has to be over 13. Do they have to be bar or bat mitzvah? And I guess I'm asking for myself, basically, like if I were to want to do that.
Great question. So don't tell any 13-year-old this, but, okay, I say that facetiously. The only thing you have to do to become a bar or bat mitzvah is turn 13. Right? Being 13 is the age of majority. It's the same way, like, you get to vote when you turn 18, right? And so it's the same thing with bar and bat mitzvah. The Jewish community celebrates our bar and bat mitzvahs by having them read Torah, by leading services, all the things that they're now allowed to do. And so that's why it's there. So Brian, you know, let's say you wanted to get up there, right, and lead. It doesn't matter what happened at age 13. You're of the age of majority. That being said, there are some people who say, you know what, I want to make that special, right? And they'll hold off, right, until A, their skill set is up to par and ready to go, and B, you can make a bar mitzvah out of that first time you're reading Torah, or that first time you're leading prayers. And that's actually a really wonderful thing. It's a program we have at Beth Or that we run an adult bar and bat mitzvah class. Another thing that, it's come up a bunch already in class today is the issue of gender. Judaism has always been very much a segregated religion I'm talking throughout history, where women almost never had the rights and privileges that men had. It's only in the last 100 years that you have something called the bat mitzvah. For hundreds of years before that, it was only men doing it. Mordechai Kaplan's daughter, Judith Kaplan, is the first documented bat mitzvah. And in fact, a Reconstructionist rabbi, a colleague of mine, is coming out with a book, a children's book called Judy Led the Way. His daughter, Judith Kaplan, that she was the first one to do this. So it's a really cool thing. And today, right, I said this to a bat mitzvah girl this afternoon, that we got online, and I said, I can only say this to half of the students I meet with, but the fact that you're doing this is a statement for women's rights, right? That you can get up to the Torah and do what men do. And that's not something we take for granted, because there are places in the world, there are places in our community, right? Other traditions other Jewish traditions that treat women differently, that they can't come up to the Torah, that they can't lead prayer services. So it's a big deal for sure. All right. Other questions? And by the way, consider that an official plug to, come join our adult bar and bat mitzvah class whenever you're interested. All right. So that is, okay. So that's the talit. And you know what? I can't skip the opportunity. I'm gonna pull up a poem for us it's one of my favorite poems of all time. It's by Yehuda Amichai. I have shown you his work here before. And it is actually found in Mishkan Tefillah, which is the Reform prayer book. Okay, that's what it's the title of the Siddur. You now have that word. We're reinforcing it, using in a different context. Okay, and here is the poem that I just absolutely adore. I hope you do too. It doesn't start this fabulous poem. I just Googled this, so here it is. Whoever put on a tallis when he was young will never forget. Tallis is another word for talit. It's the more Yiddish Ashkenazic way of pronouncing it. Whoever put on a tallis when he was young will never forget. Taking it out of the soft velvet bag, opening the folded shawl, spreading it out, kissing the length of the neckband, embroidered or trimmed in gold, then swinging it in a great swoop overhead, like a sky, a wedding canopy, a parachute, and then winding it around his head, and in hide and seek, wrapping his whole body in it, close and slow, snuggling into it like the cocoon of a butterfly, then opening would-be wings to fly. And why is the tallis striped and not checkered black and white like a chessboard? Because the squares are finite and hopeless. Stripes come from infinity, and to infinity they go, like airport runways where angels land and take off. Whoever has put on a tallis will never forget. When he comes out of a swimming pool or the sea, he wraps himself in a large towel, spreads it out again over his head, and again snuggles into it close and slow, still shivering a little, and he laughs and blesses. So there's so much to dig in. We could spend the rest of the class on this, but what I love about that poem, number one, is that the way that so Yehuda Amichai grew up Orthodox. He grew up studying in a traditional yeshiva, a traditional place of learning, and wound up being a secular Israeli citizen. When he mentions the parachute, he was an Israeli soldier, and so had an experience of being on the battlefield, and I think there's an allusion to that. And also what he's alluding to, right, this idea of runways for angels that land and take off. Once again, let's go back to the talit and I'll show you, right? He's talking about the stripes. He's talking about the stripes that go across a talit, right? And no matter what color you're using or whatever, it has these stripes that are across, and that's the traditional way that it's been done for a very long time. Also, if you can picture in your mind the Israeli flag, all right, it is modeled after the talit. It's modeled after the prayer shawl, and it has the two blue stripes, one on top, one on the bottom. So it's also a call, an allusion to this garment. Okay. All right, so we have talit, we have a kippah, okay, and traditionally also, so here's a big difference. This is actually a big moment in class. I would like throw this to the floor. There's nothing holy about a kippah. There's nothing commanded about a kippah. It's not in the Torah, but it's a strong custom, okay, of wearing one of these, but it's not required. And so, you know, wearing it, a lot of people, you might have also, a kippah is it's literally the Hebrew word for dome, okay? In some communities, you might hear the word yarmulke, okay, or yarmulke, and that is actually a contraction of the words yireh malka, which is fear of the king in Aramaic. And the idea is that it's a constant reminder that there is something above us, right, and that we cover our head, and that's where that idea comes from. I would say most Jews in the world wear it. You know, for me, I do not wear a kippah all the time, but for me, it almost it's like my power suit, right? But seriously, it's a reminder to me that what I'm doing is holy work, right? So some people will put this on only in prayer, but I would argue, so best example of this, I had a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary who does wear a kippah all the time. He said, but if I didn't, when I would go, like if I ever went to see the Constitution of the United States of America, I would put on a kippah. Now, it was a remarkable statement, right? But he basically said, like, for him, it's reverence. It shows reverence. And so for him, that was an important thing that he would also, you know, he was a history major in college and all this stuff. So for him, that was a big thing for him. And so it's a good question to ask, like, you know, if wearing a kippah is in your idea of Jewish ritual, when would you wear it and why? So one last thing about the kippah, the Reform movement for many years banned wearing kippot. So if you walked into a synagogue wearing a kippah in the 1910s, let's say, in Germany, they would say, excuse me, sir, you know, please take that off. Because one of the goals of the Reform movement was to have very proper services that would be understood and respected by their neighbors. And so they wanted to assimilate and look like everyone else. And so there were traditions, and sometimes are traditions in the Reform movement, where there are communities where I don't think anybody would tell you to take off your kippah, but certainly it's not necessarily encouraged. The last thing I'll say is that I very purposely said, excuse me, sir, please take off your kippah. In today's world, some women have adopted the custom of wearing it, but certainly this was considered male garb for a very long time. The next one that you should know about is tefillin or phylacteries, okay, which I don't know where that word comes from, actually. I should look that up at some point. In the Shema, a prayer that we'll look at tonight, it says, place these words upon your hand and between your eyes. And so some people look at that and say, it's a metaphor, right? Do good deeds and think about it all the time, right? On your hands and between your eyes. Some people take it very literally. And so there is a custom, not on Shabbat, but on the other days of the week in prayer, to wear tefillin. So let me show you a video. We won't watch the whole thing, but so that you get a sense of what this is. Here we go.
I wrapped the tefillin 7 times around my arm, wrapping it away from me, following Nusach-inspired and Hasidic traditions. The standard Ashkenazic tradition is to wrap towards you.
Okay, so you're already seeing that this teacher is highlighting something about tefillin, right? About tefillin, that it's actually, it's based on custom. And so depending on if you come from Europe or from other countries in the Far East or in the Middle East, you would do this differently based on the custom of your community.
I wrap 7 times, evocative of many meanings and symbolisms of the number 7 in Jewish tradition. After wrapping the 7 times on my arm, I wrap the tefillin around my hand just to secure them before moving on to the head tefillin. To place the head tefillin, you may need to remove or relocate your head covering to make room for the placement at the beginning. I take the box, holding on to the box, and place the tefillin on my head, making sure that the front of the box of tefillin lines up with my hairline, or wherever your hairline used to be in case it's receding.
I feel so heard and seen.
And before securing it, I recite the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al mitzvot tefillin. I secure it, making sure that the knot in the back of the tefillin rests snugly on the soft spot in the nape of my neck. And I make sure that the alignment of the front box of the tefillin is centered along the center line between my eyes. You can test that just by running your fingers up and making sure it's centered and comfortable and fits snugly around your head. The black side of the straps should be facing out, and you can bring your straps around to the front and lay them down along your chest. Following that, I recite the phrase, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Finally, we return to the hands tefillin. Here, I'll write on my hand with the tefillin, I'll wrap the word Shaddai, Shin Daled Yud, one of the names of God, beginning with the first leg of the letter Shin. I then wrap the tefillin around my middle finger, first around the upper knuckle, and then twice around the lower knuckle. First of the middle finger only, and then of the remaining 3 fingers of my hand. And there are a variety of customs, again, about the wrapping and spelling out of this name of God. Finally, I complete the shin with the outer leg and then the center leg of the shin so that you can see the shin, daled, and yud of God's name. As I'm wrapping the tefillin around my middle finger, I recite the passage from the prophet Hosea. Ve'irastich li le'olam, ve'irastich li b'tzedek u'b'mishpat u'b'chesed u'b'rachamim. Ve'irastich li be'emunah v'yadat et Adonai.
All right. So I've got a lot of thoughts about this, but I'm curious to hear your reactions. Well, I should explain one thing. Those boxes, inside those boxes are the words of the Shema, the words of a prayer that we'll study later. And so for, and that's all I'll say. And so it's in this way fulfilling the commandment of placing the words on your arm and on your head or between your eyes. What are your reactions, thoughts? Has anyone never seen that done before or never seen tefillin? All right, so we've all kind of seen it. Okay, all right, we got a few newbies to it. All right, great, that's awesome. So here's what I want to share about this. It is very clear to me, right, that the teacher explaining this derives great meaning out of the specifics, right, and great meaning out of action. If you saw, right, very deliberate with how he would wrap the tefillin around his arm, very much saying, right, that you need to find the soft spot in your head, right, and that you need to have it directly aligned with your nose. Okay, this is a spiritual type. Okay, and we talk about this a lot in rabbinical school, and it applies very much to prayer. We are all different spiritual types. Some of us derive great meaning out of following the letter of the law. Some of us derive great meaning from kind of being all over the place, right? Some of us are more introspective. Some of us like to be loud with how we express ourselves. And the key is finding what works for you, right? There are all different ways to pray, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But this is one of those ways. And so the other thing to note is that none of that is actually described in the Torah. None of those like 7 times around the arm, right? Spell out the word Shaddai, which is a name for God. None of this is in the Torah other than place these words on your hand and on your head, and from there, or between your eyes, and from there, the rabbis of the Talmud, right? What you're seeing is the evolution of thousands of years of arguing. How do we do this, right? What's this going to look like? Let's get the leather guy involved, right? Well, he needs some business. We'll make some boxes, right? Of course, I say that facetiously, but in reality, right, this is how practices and Jewish practices evolve. So again, here with tefillin, this has always been seen for thousands of years as a male tradition. And in the past 100 years or so, probably even more like the last 50 years, women also do this. And there's this really cool, I don't think it's the actual Barbie doll, but there is a Barbie lookalike doll that's made with a set of tefillin, and that girls can play with and use to show that women can do it too. All right. So I'll pause there. Reactions, questions? Bonnie, go ahead.
How often, I believe that the tefillin is used when you first wake up in the morning, because that's the way they did it when I watched Shtizzle on Netflix.
For the morning prayer.
For the morning prayers, but do you do it any other time of the day? Or when do you use that?
Great question. Only in the morning. We have evidence of writings of some people who would put it on in the morning and leave it on all day. We're talking in ancient times, like 1st century, when this innovation came to be. But today, in our modern day, it's done at shacharit. So it doesn't have to be as soon as you wake up. I would say many people do have it as part of their morning routine, meaning, brush your teeth, do all that stuff, and then you've got, morning prayers. Some people, will take their tefillin and talit with them on their way to work. I have a professor from rabbinical school who did exactly this. He said, like, things were just too crazy at home, he had young kids. So he went about the morning, made breakfast, did all this stuff. And then when he got to work, right, it helped. He worked in a rabbinical school, right? He would join the minyan if it was taking place, or he would just pray, or another word you can know, daven, which is a Yiddish word. It actually comes from the word to divine, I shouldn't say it comes from, but it's related to the word divine. And so some people will call prayer or tefillah davening. So yes, so it's a morning thing, and not during holidays or Shabbat, only on regular days, like the everyday days. So we've got our uniform set. We've known who leads the tefillot. Now we have to ask ourselves, where does tefillah happen? So sadly, in different times, this would be the time where we'd get up from our classroom and go check out our sanctuary here at Beth Or. Some of you have been there, some of you have not. That's okay. We've got the marvels of the internet. I'm in viewer mode here. Let's see if I can, there we go. So, first let's start with Beth Or, and then we'll make our way around. So we have one that you're familiar with. Okay, so This is definitely an angle you haven't probably seen our sanctuary from. It was up top from the ceiling. This is Beth Or's sanctuary. And so, especially for those of you who are are members here, but also even if you've never seen it, I'm curious to hear about people's experience, what they feel like when they're in this sanctuary. And if you never have been to Beth Or, what do you notice about this sanctuary? Both, not necessarily because it's Beth Or's, but just what do you notice about what this communicates about Jewish prayer? I kind of want to use this as a template for that. So what do you see? What do you notice? And because I'm sharing my screen, I can't see all of you at once. Actually, I think I can change that. But so go ahead, just shout it out if you'd like. Oh, someone put something. Okay. Bonnie and David said the light. Okay, it's that's not a mistake. Our name of our synagogue is Beit Or, House of Light. So clearly, when they built this place, they had a lot of that in mind. So you see, you got windows here, right? The windows here. That's not the light. That's lit up with light bulbs, okay? And all the way around here, that's all light bulbs. It's not coming from the outside for nighttime purposes. Okay, so Margie says she notices the stained glass windows. Something really great and interesting, I think, about Jewish houses of worship. It is a requirement in the Talmud that you need to pray where you can see the outdoors. There has to be a window. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but one beautiful explanation is that you can't think of prayer as something that is done inside a sanctuary and then you go out into the rest of the world and do whatever the heck you want. Right? The idea is that you're always seeing where you want this to take you. Right? So I use this example with bar and bat mitzvah kids. If I lead the most beautiful service ever and then I go and drive home and curse someone out on the way, because I ran a red light and start yelling and screaming and, flip the bird, if you will, a nice way of saying it, right? I haven't done my job, right? That's not prayer, right? Prayer is saying the words, being very intentional about them, and then behaving accordingly in my life, right? That's prayer. That's what prayer is designed to do. The other thing is the other part of it is to actually see God's creation, right? That if we're talking about, there's this beautiful line, it's one of my favorite in Jewish liturgy, Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam. Praised is the one who spoke and the world came to be. And it's this idea that we remember creation, and whether that means the Big Bang to you or the Hebrew Bible, if you take it literally, what are we saying here? What we're saying is like that stuff outside is miraculous, right? And we get a chance to live in it. That's worthy of praise. That's worthy of singing out our prayers. Maddie mentioned the writing above here. So this is a line from Proverbs and each synagogue is different. They're all different kinds. Ours says, Or zarua la tzadik u'yishre lev simcha. So or is the connection, right? It's the house of light, and it starts with or, light. So it's light is sown for the righteous, and for the upright of heart, happiness is sown. So that's what this says going across the ark. And thank you also, Maddie, for bringing up the ark. So this is an ark. This was commissioned, I believe. So I think what happened in my history of Beth Or, and someone can correct me if I'm off on this, but all of these stained glass windows were there from a previous building that were carried over, and then the artist was commissioned to do this big work for the ark. Inside here, inside these red doors, are the Torah scrolls that we keep in there, and we talked about that last time. So that's where our Torah is. Sarah says it's very, I think, right, so, sorry. Okay, so Sarah says it's very open. Yes, it's like we got plenty of room in there. It comes in handy these days, actually. When we do bar and bat mitzvahs, we have 20 people in here. And certainly it seats a lot more. So thank God we can do that safely. And Pearl is talking about the eternal light. So this is such a key part to any sanctuary right here. Okay, is that it's what it's meant. I don't know if I can zoom in on here. Let's see. No, it's actually making it smaller. Okay, so this is what's called the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, and it's supposed to be a reference to the great temple in Jerusalem, the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple, and there would be an eternal flame that was kept going 24/7 by the priests that were working there. And so there is a tradition for many synagogues, not all, but many, to have a Ner Tamid, an eternal light that is always burning. And I picked this up actually from my senior rabbi in Tempe, Rabbi Dean Shapiro, who said, whenever someone asks me, well, what happens when the light goes out? His answer is, we change the light bulb, right? So it's not like if the light goes out, oh my God, like something's going to happen, right? You change the light bulb and then it's on again. But there is great metaphor in it, right? That you are keeping an eternal flame going. So that is probably a perfect segue to talk a little bit about the history of prayer. Where did prayer come from? The idea was, and it is an idea that predates Judaism, that it's important to appease the gods. Okay, that's pre-Judaism. Then we kind of work in to appease God. Okay, singular. But that is the idea that has been happening for thousands of years. The primary mode of which that happened in the ancient world was sacrificing of animals. And so if you look at the stories in the Torah, if you look at commandments in the Torah, many of them are about the laws of sacrifice. How do you sacrifice an animal? How do you do it correctly? How do you burn the corpse up to God, the animal corpse up to God? And it literally says in the Torah, the phrase is reach nichoach, a pleasing odor. I like to paraphrase to say, God loves barbecue. Okay, if you've ever smelled what it smells like at a barbecue, then you know what the people were smelling in the temple and what was going up to heaven. And they were saying, like, do we need more parsley and oregano, or what do you need, God, right? So that was the primary mode. Now, I will also say that it smelled incredibly foul once the day was done, because these animals were slaughtered there and you had blood everywhere, and it was probably also gross. But when you're burning the meat, it smelled pretty good. So that was prayer for a very long time. And we know we have traces of prayer in the Hebrew Bible. I'll share my screen and show you just a few examples. How do I do this? There we go. All right, this was not done by me. I'm borrowing from someone. It's one of the great things about Sefaria is you can look up anything and it has a great list of people who do source sheets. So this is one by Yoni Nadiv. Thank you, Yoni. All right, and so the first one he cites here is from the book of Bemidbar in Hebrew, Numbers in English. And so it says here, and Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And so this is one of the first times where we actually see a prayer of words in the Hebrew Bible. Up until now, people have conversations with God, but nobody's really asking God of much, right? There's no prayer or of God much. What they're doing instead is saying, whatever it is, arguing or asking or just having conversations. Here's one from Deuteronomy. And the priest shall take the basket out of thy hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord thy God. And thou shalt speak and say before the Lord thy God, a wandering Aramean was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and he became there a nation, great, mighty, and populous. And the Egyptians dealt ill with us and afflicted us, and laid upon us hard bondage. And we cried unto the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice, and saw our affliction, and our toil, and our oppression. And the Lord brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with great terribleness, and with signs, and with wonders. And he hath brought us into this place, and hath given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So I'm going to stop my share there and say that what we see here is actually, this was a stop on the way, you would either bring bread or you would bring an animal, and either way it was going to get burnt up. So this is clearly another, because it came from the Torah, from Deuteronomy, this is another example of, here, thank you, Mr. Priest, right? Kohen, the guy who's going to be taking this. Here's my sacrifice. Thank you very much. But before I go, I'm obligated by the Torah to recite this story. And it's a story about my father was a wandering Aramean, and we wandered down to Egypt, and God took us out of Egypt. What's going on here? Some people say that's prayer. Prayer is something that is, it can be petitionary. Please, God, heal her. And by the way, in that moment, it's Moses praying for Miriam after she gets leprosy on her hand. That's one way to look at this. And the other way to look at this, or the other way to look at prayer, is it defines who you are. The way you pray says a lot about you. And so Jews have certain ways of praying that identify the Jewish people as the people of Israel, right? The people of the Jewish people. I'll pause here and to take a sip of my seltzer. What questions do you have? What anything resonate with you? Pearl, go ahead.
So if prayer began with appeasing God, when did it come to asking God for things or forgiveness or for helping in some tragedy you're going through?
It's a great question. As far as the sacrifices are concerned, and this might be my bias, but I actually see all of the sacrifices as some kind of appeasement, right? Things are going well. There's a Thanksgiving offering, right, where basically you're saying, God, things are great. Keep it up. Here you go, right? And in some ways you're almost appeasing God for the future. If I've done something wrong, I might be afraid that I'm going to get struck down, right? So in that way also, I offer a sin offering. I've done this wrong. Please, God, don't kill me. And so that's really how I think, and I think a lot of people see the sacrificial cult, as it's called, the Jews that existed in the couple of centuries, maybe half a millennium before the Common Era, and then into the year 70 when the Second Temple was destroyed. Another example is in the book of Samuel, the prophet Samuel, before he's born, his mom is barren, and Hannah, she goes into where Eli the priest is, and she's praying. I should say she's talking with God, and it says in the text she's moving her lips but not audibly, and the priest comes over, the Kohen comes over and says, "Get out of here, you're drunk." And it's this another way of narratively showing a shift going on, that this priest, this Kohen, is used to people coming in and saying, if you want something, give me your goat, or give me your cow and I'll sacrifice it for you. But all of a sudden we see this woman who is doing petitionary prayer. She's asking God for something with her words, not with an offering. And so we start to see this shift. The rabbis of the Talmud make a ruling and basically say, after the year 70 CE, when the temple was destroyed, no more sacrifices. The temple is destroyed. We can't sacrifice to God that way anymore. We need to start using our words. And that is seen as the birth of prayer. The rabbis of the Talmud retroactively try and read the prayers back into the Hebrew Bible by saying that Abraham, it says often, it's a common line in the Bible, that Abraham fell on his face, and they will often point to that and say, see, that was Abraham praying, and Isaac prayed in the afternoon, and Jacob prayed in the evening, and that's why many Jews pray 3 times a day. So it evolved. We actually don't know much. We don't have many prayer books because a lot of this was done either spontaneously or it was done out of either spontaneously or as a group and led by a shaliach tzibur, an emissary of the community. And it's basically, that people would just sing along or talk along or recite along. It was not necessarily the way we envision it today. We don't have much evidence of it because of that. There are no ancient prayer books, but we do the best we can to piece together what those services might look like. We start seeing, and archaeologists have found synagogues in ancient Israel. If any of you have ever been there, up on the top of Masada, there is a synagogue up there where people lived for that time. And it's actually an amazing place where some people will have their bar and bat mitzvah. People who travel to Israel will go into that synagogue and get bar and bat mitzvah there. So really powerful stuff. So two more words, I didn't write them out, but the words are keva and kavanah. And these are two really important words because if we're going to talk about using our words to worship, then it's very easy for us to think that prayer is about saying certain words, almost like a magic spell, right? If I say the words properly and I say it with the right intonation, then I'm unlocking a secret or I'm making something happen in the world. But I could do that without feeling, right? If it's very technical, I can do it without what's inside. And so you have what's called, so that is the keva. The keva is the words, the set words of the prayer book that I could read like I'm reading an encyclopedia. But then there's kavanah, intention, which is adding my feelings, the power of words or the power of my heart into those words and making them mean something. It's a remarkable thing about language, right? That we can speak words and we can speak them in a way that really matters and means something. And those are two, I think they can be two very different things. Yeah, sure, right? Instead of, as a response, instead of course, I can't wait to be there, right? Those are two very different ways of saying I'll be there. One is like, yeah, whatever, right? And the other is really, important. I will, so as I mentioned to this class before, I had the pleasure of learning from Maddie's dad, who is who's a great educator in his own right, and so I will share something that he taught to illustrate the difference between keva and kavanah. Okay, and it goes as the following: I will say the following phrase to you, okay, which is, "I did not say you stole the money." Okay. And so here we go. I'm going to say it a bunch of different ways. I didn't say you stole the money. 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 Right? Each time I've said that same phrase, I've emphasized a different word, and it has changed what I've said. Right? Language is so much more than the words we use, and we can emphasize certain words, and we can feel it and mean it or gesture with our bodies in a way that's going to completely change what I'm saying. And so the same is true with prayer. Right? I can rattle off a bunch of words in Hebrew, or I could focus on two words in Hebrew, but have them really mean something. Right? And that, I would say, is, depending on your theology, is equally as important. So there are movements in Judaism that have played with and have worked with chants, people who take 2 or 3 words of text and say it over and over again and have it mean something. I will tell you that was one of the growing edges of mine in rabbinical school, because I'm not much of a chanting guy, but I will say it's remarkable, and it's remarkable what it can do to think about a few words or even just say them without living up here and living down here in your heart for a while, you know, and feeling it. Other people get a lot of meaning out of reading each and every word, saying them properly, and saying it the right way. So that's my spiel on keva and kavanah. I want you to try something, if you can, and I'm intentionally being very vague. Would you please take out a piece of paper and a pen, or you can use a computer, it's totally fine. And I'd like you to write a prayer. And I will give you no more, instruction than that. Go ahead. I'll give you 5 minutes. I'll give you 2.5 minutes. How about that? All right. First question. Did anyone draw a picture? Okay. So the last time I taught this, someone drew a picture and I was like, like, that's a prayer, right? Like, doesn't have to be words. And I was blown away. The person happened to have been an artist, so I throw that out. So, all right, next question. So you've all failed. I'm just kidding. So now, what did you write? So I'm going to go at this very, very methodically. Okay. Raise your hand if, and by the way, again, prayer can be very personal. If you don't want to share, you don't have to share. Okay, and that's the blanket statement for this. Did your prayer involve a request? If it involved a request, raise your hand. Okay, so a lot of you. Okay. Did your prayer express gratitude in some way? Okay. Did anyone complain in their prayer? Actually, that's such a negatively charged word. Did you protest at all? Did you demand anything? Nobody. Okay. So respectful. Who did you write this to? So I don't answer that, but raise your hand if you wrote this prayer to God. Okay. Wow. That's a lot of you. Wonderful. So first of all, I'd love to hear what it felt like to write your prayer. What were you thinking? What did it feel like inside to do this exercise? I'm happy for anyone to share. If you feel more comfortable, you can put in the chat, you know, whatever you want. Sean, go ahead.
I would say that my prayer was really current in talking about the health and safety based on our current circumstances, as well as focusing on the positives of connection and community as opposed to divisiveness and hatred.
Beautiful. Wow. That's great. Anyone else?
Well, mine was
Oh,
a mother's prayer for my son, and that I wanted God to keep him safe and that kind of stuff, and let him live the life he wants, and remind him he's always loved by friends and family, and he's my favorite person.
very sweet. Bonnie, I saw your hand up also. And then John, we can go to you next.
Prayer for me, I have more of a humanist take on it. And so my prayer was just, I am thankful. But to me, I didn't necessarily write that prayer to God. It was more, it makes me feel more connected to other humans, to other people, that God exists in the space between human beings. And so when I wrote the prayer, I felt connection.
Beautiful. John, go ahead.
So it was a prayer for appreciation and giving thanks for good health, family, friendships.
Beautiful. So what Bonnie said, Bonnie, I just want to lift up what you said, that we all have a different understanding of what God is. And so when people pray, right, you might call it God or you might not, but that means something different. So I love to imagine like a room full of people praying. I mean, God willing, we can just have that again, full stop. But when people do, I always wonder, like, where are these prayers going? Right? To whom? For those of you, actually, many of you, or a few joined after this discussion, but we were discussing the comedy show Schitt's Creek that has been a big hit these days. And there's this wonderful scene, I think it's in the second to last season, where the family gets on their knees and holds hands, and the person leading the prayer goes, "To whom it may concern," and it's this great line. So, but to think about where we're directing this prayer, right? It's amazing. And for those of us who are expressing gratitude and thanks, where's that going, right? And what does that say about our theology? Do we believe? Are we saying thank you to a being that has granted us this? Are we just saying it's a feeling of gratitude inside? And those two things go hand in hand, right? They can push us to think about what we believe, and what we believe can push us to act a certain way. And that is a very, I think, intriguing and amazing and inspiring dance that we get to do as human beings, right? To think about the world we live in. Dave. Oh.
Just say something, and now part of what Bonnie said was we were looking at a Torah one time and in a class, and it was mentioned that there's between the letters there's even meaning. So what she said reminded me of that. Yes,
the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics, say that the Torah is black fire on white fire. That the spaces and the stuff behind the spaces, or the letters and everything around the letters, all have meaning, and it's our job to pull it out. It's wonderful. So Sean's got a great question about the Western Wall. So for those of you who have ever been to the Western Wall, there's a custom to leave a note, to leave a prayer in the wall, and tradition is that those are sent up to it's a direct line to the heavens, and it is a remarkable tradition. The idea is that place is the closest we get to the temple in Jerusalem. Now, the Western Wall, there's often a misunderstanding. The Western Wall was a retainer wall built in Herodian time, like the times of King Herod. It's not actually the western part of the temple itself. The temple was located on the Temple Mount, where today the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque are. And so, but it's considered the very closest place where to the to the Holy of Holies, the holiest place in Jewish tradition. So the idea is that's where you leave your prayer, and it's like, there's the portal to the heavens above. It's all about your belief. It's all about what you think, and so I think it's it's a beautiful tradition, and we've done things at the many synagogues where I've worked as a rabbinic intern and now as a rabbi. Where children can write letters. If someone's going to Israel from the congregation, children can write letters, adults can write letters and send them with. And there is that's another big part of this tradition, that actually there's a tradition that if you are a shaliach, an emissary, going to do a mitzvah, that you'll be protected on your journey. And so there's this beautiful custom, if someone's going on any trip, but especially to Israel, Jewish people will give them 2 sums of money. Okay, and they'll say, this is for the trip there, and this is for the trip back, and saying, like, you have to, I need you to give charity when you get to Israel, and I need you to give charity when you come back. And basically, it's this superstition that if you're on your way to do a good deed, that you will be protected so that you can fulfill that deed. And it's a beautiful tradition. And in the same way, there are people who will carry the notes with them and say, I'm an emissary of this prayer, right? I'm carrying a prayer with me, and I'll go there. I will share with you one of the most moving experiences I had in Israel. Was I was a rabbinic intern right before my year in Israel at a synagogue in New York, and I was sitting at the bedside of someone who passed away, and in our conversations, she asked me to take a note to the wall. We had discussed that I was going to Israel, and so I was able, my first trip to the Western Wall as a rabbinical student, I placed her note in the wall and said the mourner's Kaddish for her. It was very, very powerful, and really, just a special thing that people can do for one another. So, prayers, they matter. They really do. So there are all different prayers. I want to dive in a little bit to, well, actually, sorry, I'll pause there. Thoughts, questions? Thank you for participating in the exercise, okay? And so that would be, right, the prayer that you gave is, there's a word for it in Hebrew, so tefillah is the word for prayer, tefillat halev, which is the prayers of your heart, right? What just poured out onto your papers, right, came from inside here. But there's also prayers that Jewish tradition says these are the ones that Jews use, the ones that we have to do. And actually, this project was born out of what I'm about to show you, was born out of pandemic times. All of the Reform movement's Sidurim, their prayer books, are now flip books online because people have been stuck at home and couldn't necessarily get to their synagogue. So I will show you what this looks like. Oh, that's just my family. Where'd everything go? There we go. Okay. So so here is this is here. Actually, let me put this in the chat for you. But the CCAR, Central Conference of American Rabbis, has put together this flip book and with different prayers. Okay, here, let me go back, put this link in the chat so that you have it. And if you want to look at it, on a different browser, you can do that. But I'll share my screen. And here we go. So I'm going to go to page 10. Oh. This is page 10. No. I don't know what I did here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so as I'm flipping through, I will say that every prayer service is very much like if you play a musical instrument or play sports. It's very similar. There's a warm-up, there's the main event, and there's the ending, the summary at the end, okay? So this is so what we're looking at here is the prayers for Shabbat. And what you have first, so here is this page where what you have is all these warm-up prayers, all of these songs that are often sung in synagogue. And the Reform Movement prayer book gives you your selection of what you'd like to use. Then it goes into Kabbalat Shabbat. So this is for Friday night, and this whole part of the service was made by the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics who would welcome in the Sabbath by going out to greet the Sabbath, singing all different songs. This one and starting with the Psalms. So traditionally there are 6 Psalms read at Shabbat services, starting with Psalm 95 all the way through Psalm 100, and then it goes, I believe, to Psalm 27 for the last one. Or maybe it's, I'm forgetting, it's not 27. Anyway, so you go through, and basically this is, 29, sorry, is that one. Okay, so you go through, and then basically, I'm just gonna flip ahead. Don't get too dizzy, hang in there. And then you get to, this is called Shema Uvirchoteha, the Shema and its blessings. So what I mentioned was before, you have all of these warm-up prayers, psalms, and different things that are being read. But now, warm-ups are over and it's game time. Okay, this is actually the Baruch Hu is the call to prayer, and what's being done here is it says Baruch Hu et. So this is a call and response. The prayer leader says Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamarach. Baruch Hu is actually in the imperative tense, and it's saying the leader hasn't said a blessing yet. The leader says, praise Adonai our God, and everyone says Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Leolam Ba'ed. Praise be Adonai, to whom praise is due forever, now and forever. And then the other person will follow along. Okay, or the other people will follow as well. Okay, I threw a lot at you again. Questions, comments? Nothing? Everyone's following along, understanding? Yeah, we're good? All righty. Going back in. All right. So, of course, we could spend a lot of time on all of this, but here's where we need to be for tonight. Everyone see this okay, the prayer? All right. This is, I don't think the rabbis of the Talmud would describe it this way, but this is the meat and potatoes, everyone, okay? This is the big time. The whole service starts with a warm-up and climbs. It has 2 peaks. This is one of them. The other one is the reading of Torah. But this is it. This is the statement of faith of the Jewish people. Okay, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Okay, and so it's actually presented artistically here in 2 ways. One is this arch here. That is the word Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Here it is again. Okay, it's the same exact words, and then you have it in transliteration and in translation. I'll point out a couple of things about this. Number one, this is how the text, well, not curved, but this is how the text is written inside the Torah itself. And there are 2 letters that are larger than all the other ones. The Ayin, this one here, and the Daled. And that is true for every Torah that's written. These words are actually made higher or bigger than the rest. So why? There's all kinds of beautiful answers. One is that the letters Ayin and Daled make up the word Ed, which means witness, that this is the way that the Jewish people witness the power and majesty of God, of the universe, of everything. That's one way of interpreting this. The other that I love and is probably more likely is that Aramaic, the word that was the language that was spoken around the time when this was being codified and written down. In Aramaic, the word Shema okay, with an aleph at the end meant perhaps. And so heaven forbid someone were to read it wrong and read Shema Yisrael, right? Perhaps Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Not the best statement of faith. And so the scribes wanted to make sure this was Shema, hear, listen. And then here at the end, you have Echad, okay, with a Dalid here. The Dalid and the Resh look very similar, very, very similar. And so if this word Echad became Acher, which is with a Resh, it would be other. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is other, right? Which doesn't make any sense. So they want to make sure that Shema, hear or pay attention, and the Dalid here of Echad, one, is highlighted. Okay? And these are the words that I know many of you are considering or on a path for conversion. These, when you dunk in a mikvah, we will go through what that is, but during the conversion process, you dunk into a ritual bath, and you do that 3 times. And the 3rd time, when someone who converts comes out of the mikvah, these are the first words that are on their mouth, the words of these prayers, Shema, of this prayer, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. And that's how you become a Jewish person. So, you know, one way to become a Jewish person, I should say. You go over to the other page, and there's a second line here. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. This is another beautiful thing about Jewish liturgy. It's actually woven together, okay? This is, here on the right side of the page, you have a biblical text that's woven together with a part that's brought in by the rabbis. And so the tradition is that you say the Shema out loud, and then this you say very quietly. It's actually a nod to all the Jewish communities in the world that lived under threat of the monarchy where they were living, and that if God forbid they were to say this too loud, blessed is God's glorious majesty forever and ever, that would somehow upset your majesty of their country. And so they had to whisper this line, but there's one time a year where they rejected the idea that they had to be quiet about it. And on Yom Kippur, when we say the Shema, we say this line out loud, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. There is a rabbi, I'll stop my share. So let's reflect. Questions, thoughts about the Shema? I'm actually going to be looking something up, so please just feel free to shout out.
I was just going to mention that when I was at B'nai Israel in Bridgeport, Connecticut, our Rabbi Arnold Scher, who for many years was the placement rabbi for the CCAR, before we said that prayer, he would say, and now let us recite the watchword of our faith.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That's a beautiful way to describe it. So this prayer can mean so many things to so many people. And one thing that I want to highlight tonight actually is the word Shema, which means hear or listen. And even in that, there's a big difference, right? And it goes back to this idea of keva and kavanah, right? To hear something or to actively listen to something are 2 very different things. And a rabbi who I had the fortune of crossing paths with is Rabbi Darby Lay. And what's remarkable about Rabbi Darby Lay is that he is the first profoundly deaf rabbi to lead a hearing congregation in the United States. And so I want to share this with you, a recording he made. He's a graduate of my rabbinical school. And it talks about specifically his experience of this prayer, right, of hearing of Shema Yisrael for someone who can't hear. And so hang on one second, I'll set it up. Can everyone see that okay? All right, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this. If you can, you can turn up the volume on your screens as well.
when I translate the Shema, I want to think about what each word of the prayer means. So the first word is Shema, which means listen or hear. But as a deaf person, I don't feel comfortable. It doesn't make sense to sign Shema as related to the ears. And the real meaning of the prayer, in my opinion, is to pay attention. So I sign Shema as pay attention. Shema. Second word, Yisrael. But this sign alone isn't enough, because this is the sign for Israel, the place. And the Shema is talking to Israel, the people. So I've added to Israel the gathering of all the people before. Shema Yisrael. The third word is Adonai, which we understand, we interpret as God. And I've translated Adonai as God, an expansive perception of God. The next word is Elohim, our God. So since I just finished signing Adonai, I bring my hand down to my chest and sign ours, meaning Adonai, Elohim. The next word is Adonai again. And the last word is Echad, which means one. Rather than just sign one, for a more spiritual interpretation, I like to show many and then change it into one. Echad. Shema, Israel, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad.
So I'll just say he's a remarkable human being, and his teaching is beyond inspiring to me. Not just that one. Like anytime he teaches, it's great to learn. And what I will say, and I hope, is that through his teaching, you will start to embrace the idea that we all see prayer or hear prayer or experience prayer differently. And that's what makes it so special and wonderful. Right? The last thing I want, I mean, I train a lot of kids to have their bar and bat mitzvah, and I teach people prayer all the time. And I always tell people the last thing I want is a room full of robots praying and saying the same exact thing. That's not prayer. And so to have people saying different things or thinking different things and taking their own approach to it, even when we're together and we're all on the same page, can be really, really inspiring. So if anyone, I mean, I know, look, with all of this, we are just scratching the surface of all of these ideas. And hopefully that means also that you will continue to dive deeper, right? This is a taste, and we will continue to explore more and more about what all this means, hopefully in this class, but then also forever, right? The rest of our lives. So it is 8:30. I will do my weekly hangout. It gets pretty wild sometimes for those of you who are late. Oh, I'm just kidding. So anyway, I'll be here for 10 minutes to hang out and chat. But it's great to see all of you as always. I will see you next week, and looking forward. And please feel free to send questions my way. Happy to answer them. And that's it. All right. Dave, go ahead. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Jason.
How many times is the Shema in the